Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host, Pavarotti, and I'm here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. As a disclaimer, this channel is for entertainment purposes. These are my opinions, and I'm not here to slander anyone. So let's get started. You know, it's first of all, before I go into this, it's kind of surreal sometimes when you think about it. And first of all, I'll always be grateful to my guy Harsh Reality, because he was the first big time content creator to acknowledge me, and we've been cool ever since. And he's awesome. And then over the last week, I see people that I really appreciate their genres, like true crime design, as I mentioned, repackaged one of my videos, and it was a huge honor. And then I'll be danged if I don't pop on the awesome Drip Drop and Crime Circus this week, and see he's talking about me, and I was floored. So, and again, thank you, Drip Drop, man. You're awesome. I don't even know what to say. Thank you. But that's just kind of cool. I wanted to get that out of the way. This is part 4 of my 5-part series on how they got to Bryan Kohberger. And I know the last episode, it can it can be taken the wrong way, and I hope it wasn't, because all I'm wanting to do, and by the way, I'm by no means suggesting to the defense, to disclose any of this information. I'm on here, I'm basically, I just want to get the truth of what actually happened. The truth of what actually happened in this case. As far as my investigation has led me to believe, and this is what I truly believe happened in this case, backed up by a lot of different things. And but by no way am I suggesting that the defense needs to disclose that was Bryan Kohberger parked there with the DoorDash driver. I mean, I'm not saying that that's a good strategy. I mean, they need to disclose as little as possible and let the prosecution hang themselves in this case, in my opinion. But I think it's important for all of us to understand what truly happened. And I know in my last video, it differs just a little bit from what I have suggested has happened here in the past. And I want to explain why I changed my opinion on it slightly. When we look in the historical cast part of this case that I believe the prosecution is going to try to bring, I absolutely think that what I've said in the past is going to coincide with that, as far as his trips to Emma Bailey's house over the previous 12 trips to Moscow that he took. I believe those trips are to Emma Bailey's house. I don't think he'd ever been to the King Road residence before that evening. And I explained in the last video the evidence that I believe backs up the fact that he'd never been in that area and what happened. But when you looked at my previous content on this matter, I do need to explain why I believe that on the night of the atrocity, he did not meet Emma Bailey at her house on Shetland Court, but he was told to meet her in the King Road neighborhood. And first of all, let me refresh your memory on what I had said before, and then I'll explain why, after a lot of vetting, that did not vet out, and I was led to the conclusion that I'm at now. And even as our old guy Howard Bloom says in his book, he might have even visited Bailey from time to time at her home in Moscow, which, as it happened, was tucked into the very end of a cul-de-sac, a minute or so drive from the house. When we look at the movements of the DoorDash delivery, it is quite shocking. Right at 3:24, and they take the fastest route to Shetland Court,
you can see that's 40 minutes. So that puts them at Shetland Court at 4:04 a.m. Just enough time for Emma Bailey to have left the King Road residence, dropping off the DoorDash that Xana didn't order, and then bringing herself over to her house at Shetland Court to meet Kohberger and Kopacka to deliver substances.
Well, Pavarotti, after a very long time vetting that theory, I came to the conclusion that couldn't be correct, because with the other vehicle exiting the neighborhood at 3:57, and we know that because of the Linda Lane footage, and the DoorDash driver not arriving to the house until 4 a.m., that would mean, with the DoorDash driver being a informant / witness, the only way that she could be an informant / witness is if she witnessed the next vehicle arriving in the area. And we know that's Kohberger's, and we know that he didn't park until at least 4:06, 4:07. So that means that the DoorDash driver was still there waiting on Kohberger, and that could be the only way that she could identify that person in that vehicle. So with that putting Emma Bailey at the King Road residence at that time, she obviously couldn't have left there and gone to her house on Shetland Court to meet Kohberger and Kopacka. That only leaves one scenario, and that's her meeting Kohberger and Kopacka in the King Road neighborhood, just as I laid out in my last video. So I wanted to be clear on why I altered my theory as it relates to that. Because when you really dive into the details and you really vet them, then it will create a picture that will tell you the truth about things. So I wanted to clear that up before I dive into this series, this section, which is part 4, because I want to really show you how I came to those conclusions. I came to those conclusions a lot of ways, but I want to show you the validating facts that verify my conclusions, and those are all the circumstances that happened after the atrocity. And when you line up all of these circumstances together, it verifies what I've said in part 1, part 2, and part 3. So instead of me continuing to talk, let's just get right into it, shall we? Now, I wanted to mention, because I didn't on the last video, in the evidence against Mr. Kohberger, the CSLI data, and that's what I was just discussing when I believe that Kohberger made his trips to the Shetland Court address to meet Emma Bailey in the 12 prior trips. And that's the prosecution's entire case on the CSLI, because there is no CAS data for the atrocity. So I wanted to make sure that I was clear on that before I get into what I'm about to get into in the investigation. Now, I think the timeline of the investigation itself and any major points is the most verifying fact of everything in this case. And let me go through this. We're going to start on November 13th up here, 2022, and that was the atrocity. Immediately after, law enforcement canvassed. They obtained every video that they could obtain, and they talked to all of the residents. As I've mentioned, they would certainly have talked to the resident that seen Farley lurking around the area. Then on November 20th, the next major thing happens in the investigation. They have an incomplete STR profile that they submit to CODIS, and they don't get any matches. Then on November 25th, 2022, the BOLO goes out to all the law enforcement personnel in the area for a simple white vehicle, not even an Elantra at this point. Then on November the 26th, 2022, Detective Mowry files for a warrant with Amazon requesting information on people who have purchased a K-Bar knife. Then on November 29th, 2022, he filed a warrant with K-Bar, getting all of the supplier information from the manufacturer to see who they supplied in the area that sold K-Bar knives. And then on November 29th, 2022, the FBI sends, or the Idaho State Police sends the DNA sample to Othram Labs. Then on December 2nd, 2022, TF is transferred back to the Latah County Jail. And on December 2nd through the 5th of 2022, it is my belief that Bryan Kohberger is put under surveillance because of what TF told law enforcement and the prosecutor upon his return. Now, I do believe some information must have been gleaned from TF before his return back from Spokane to Latah County, because this press release indicates that they must have had some type of information from him, because that's the only thing I can find that would indicate why they would release this press statement. And you can see on November 30th, 2022, down here in the box, it says, regarding the interview with Latah County Prosecutor Bill Thompson, we feel his responses were messaged to support the implication that new information had been released. Specifically, generalized statements regarding the potential of targeted victims and the involvement of drugs were redefined into an affirmative answer, which means it was redefined into a yes. So he must have got information from TF about the simple drug deal that he witnessed go down between the DoorDash driver and the occupants of the Hyundai Elantra. Now, why do I say between the 2nd and the 5th of 2022, Bryan Kohberger is put under surveillance? Because I believe he was under surveillance from that point up until the point where they implemented the search warrant on his apartment. And more so, I believe that he knew he was under surveillance. Most of us have seen the social media post from Bryan Kohberger during this time, where he posts nothing but an eyeball and the phrase, "I see you too," indicating that he is aware that he's under surveillance, and he is trying to let them know that he sees that he's under surveillance. And this leads me to believe, along with a lot of other things, that at this point TF has only given up Kohberger and an unnamed DoorDash driver, because law enforcement has nothing else other than that, and that is the reason they put surveillance on Bryan Kohberger. However, I believe that Kohberger and Kohberger had disengaged from each other long before this for good reason, and they had even discussed things like making sure that they had zero cell phone communication between the two of them. And that is my suspicion of why when they unalived Kohberger, his cell phone was reset and everything was wiped from it. Then on December 6th, 2022, just like we would expect, a DoorDash warrant is filed by Detective Mowry. So again, at this point, it's obvious in the investigation that all they know is Kohberger, Elantra, and DoorDash, nothing else. Now here is the warrant for DoorDash, which you can see was filed on December the 6th, 2022 by Detective Lawrence Mowry. And then on December the 7th, 2022, we had the BOLO go out to all of the public, this time for a possible witness or witnesses in a 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra. They're trying to actively find the driver of the car that Kopacka was in at this point.
And breaking news in the investigation into the murders of the 4 University of Idaho students, detectives announced just minutes ago that they are interested in talking to the person or people in a white 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra.
Yeah, they don't have a license plate number. That's an Elantra, but you're looking at a stock photo of the type of car they are looking for. Moscow police say the car was near the home where 3 of the students lived during the early morning hours of November 13th. That's the day the bodies of the 4 students, Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonsalves, were discovered.
Moscow police say the person or people in that car may have critical information regarding the case. They're asking anyone with information about the car or who was driving it on either the day of or day before the murders to call their tip line at the number.
Now, also on December 7th, they get the DoorDash warrant back with all the information. Then on December 8th, they get that Amazon warrant back with all of its information. Now, I believe that there was a lot of information returned in both of these warrants, and it would have taken them some time to dig through and find any type of information that they were looking for that would lead them to either being able to get a warrant for Kopacka's apartment and identifying who that DoorDash driver was the night of the atrocity, because there was no record with DoorDash of that order being placed. And here is the docket showing the return of the DoorDash warrant on December the 7th. So that's when Mallory had all of that information in place. And here's the return of the search warrant for the Amazon list on December the 8th. So that's when they had all that information to go through. And here's what's interesting. From December 8th all the way up until December the 14th, there were no warrant returns for any other pertinent information in this case, which tells us that there was absolutely nothing going on in this investigation. And that is backed up by the press releases during that time. December the 9th, nothing new. December the 10th, nothing new. December the 12th, nothing new. December the 13th, nothing new either. But they must have finally got something that was enabled them to get a search warrant for Kopacka's apartment issued on December 13th, because we know when they went into his apartment, they announced, "Brent, we have a search warrant to search your apartment and a warrant for your arrest." And because those are Washington State warrants, we've never been able to look at them, sealed to this day. So on December the 14th, they implement that search warrant, and Kopacka is killed during the processing of that search warrant by law enforcement. And then on December the 15th, 2022, we out of nowhere get a notice of judge change on the TF case in an amazingly fast amount of time. And that change of judge goes from Megan Marshall over to the district court to Judge John Judge on the day that, basically the same day that they unalived one Brent Kopacka. Now here is the notice of judge assignment change on that same day that Megan Marshall signs the sealment of the Amazon warrant, and it just happens to be the same day that they unalived Brent Kopacka.
I don't believe they got any information from Kopacka, and when they got his phone, it was wiped clean, as we all know. So it didn't lead to Kohberger at this point. So that leaves me to give you a very educated speculation at this point. And I believe that from December 16th through the 19th, sometime during that time, the DoorDash driver is identified and located, and she names Kohberger as the person that she was bringing the narcotics to. And the reason that they keep her quiet is because of the drug transaction that's involved in this. And that's why you'll see her charges on other matters get dropped later on, because she is a key witness in this case. But then also on December 19, 2022, TF is sentenced to what I always refer to as the deal of the century, because they have to lock him in with his story right there. That is his deal. Now, they do not want to disclose TF because of his past record. They probably are nervous about disclosing Emma Bailey because of her record, but they're going to have to. But December 20th in the investigation, we all know, because we watched Brett Payne on the stand admit, that was the day that he actually talked to the WSU officer that said he found Kohberger's Elantra. So everything in the PCA regarding Kohberger starts December the 20th. Which leads me to believe that all of the events that I've described to this point are very accurate. Now, because of the reliability of those two informants, they knew they were going to have to come up with something to why they got to Kohberger, even though it would never be used in the actual trial. And that's where they imagined up and processed up that IgG, because they were covering up for their informer's reliability. And here's what we learn with the IgG. I watched a critiquing content creators video about Othram the other day as she was critiquing my video, and she did something very disingenuous. When she got to the part where it talked about how long it took to create an S&P profile, she used general language. Othram says it could take between 3 days to make a DNA profile, 6 weeks or sometimes longer depending upon circumstances. She alluded that they could do an S&P profile in 3 days. Very disingenuous. Yeah, Othram can do a STR profile in 3 days. They claim they can do an S&P in as early as 6 weeks. However, I have looked through so many cases I can't tell you, and I cannot find any case where they were able to complete an S&P profile in 6 weeks or less. And right here we can see another example of Othram's involvement in a case, and this one was in, looky here, September of 2022. And this was after BCSO exhumed the remains a second time to collect DNA samples. The first attempted in 2019 yielded insufficient samples. The samples that did arrive were contaminated and degraded, which she said is common in these cases. Contaminated and degraded. Whenever you're dealing with touch DNA, skin cells, they're always degraded samples. So this would be something similar to what they were dealing with in the Kohberger case. But you can see by the start of 2023, Othram scientists had a DNA profile. Well, they got it in September of 2022. So because of it was a degraded sample, it took them at least 4 months to create the S&P profile. And folks, this is what more than likely happened in the Kohberger case. And you can see in 2019, Othram launched forensic-grade genome sequencing, which harnesses the power of massively parallel sequencing paired with proprietary laboratory methods, computation algorithms, and database resources. Forensic-grade genome sequencing prioritizes minimizing consumption of evidence while producing the most comprehensive genetic profile from forensic inputs. Working with evidence unsuitable for other methods and laboratories, Othram has fully integrated an in-house process that includes DNA extraction, enrichment, and repair to the sequencing and analysis. You see, they take a degraded sample and then they extract it, enrich it, and then repair it to sequencing and analysis. But the key to their process, folks, is in the repairing of their sequencing. Because to do that, they use the KIN SNP process they've developed, which is easy to figure out what that is. The KIN SNP is the perfect companion to FGGS to accelerate the investigative process while maximizing privacy protections for voluntary target testers. And not only because the results are not entered into a genealogy database, said David Middleman, Othram's CEO. When target tests take months, investigators are compelled to test several potential relatives in parallel. But if it's quicker, the test can be done in series with the selection of each candidate informed by the results for the others, leading to fewer tests overall to get solved. So what they're saying in a nutshell is they test other potential relatives and to minimize the results. If they have a relative that is suspected to be a relative, then they can repair their original profile with that relative's DNA extraction enrichment, therefore creating a profile that matches that really didn't match.
You see, folks, I try to vet everything every which way that I can in this matter. And when you look at all of the evidence that I presented that led up to them arresting Mr. Kohberger, and then you correlate everything I said in the first 3 videos to the actual investigation timeline into Bryan Kohberger's arrest, it vets all of the other information once again. And that's what I try to do in this case, is take a theory, vet it with the evidence that leads to the theory, and then try to prove it based on other aspects of the case. And when I vet it 3 different ways, I'm going to be pretty strong in my theory. Now, there are a couple of things that I still need in this case before I finalize my final theory in this case. And I will not stop looking until I find those last few things that I need. Once I do, though, I will lay out everything exactly the way that I feel happened in this case. And I'm going to do my best to do that before the trial of this case, so we can go into it with eyes wide open with what we need to know and what we need to see in this case. But that's part 4. I'm not done. I've got more that's going to back up everything I've said in part 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I'm going to be doing that in episode 5. And then I threw in a little bit of the DNA there at the end. I don't want to confuse you with that because I've got a lot of information about the S&P profile, the STR profile, what the defense is trying to do in the case, what the prosecution's trying to do, what I think law enforcement did, and the methods in which I think they used to point the finger at Kohberger that was disingenuous. That is another video all in itself. It won't be in this 5-part series. But please like and subscribe to the channel. Post your comments, thoughts, your criticisms. And until next time, Bobby Roddy's out.